Good morning. With the help of Hashem, we are learning Yerushalmi Trumos, Peidik Tes, Halacha Beis, and Halacha Gimel. We're going to learn today Daf Pei Tes, and we left off on Daf Pei Tes, Amud Aleph, Mamash on top of the Amud. We're going to begin by referring back to the second topic in the Mishnah, the second topic of Halacha Beis, and that is that B'davar Shezaroi Kole, which is the vast majority of items that are planted. If a person planted and they have now 100 rows of Gedulei Truma and they planted one row of Chulin, and the Mishnah is purposefully giving those numbers because in the opposite direction, we know that even on a rabbinic level, one of Truma is nullified in 100 Chulin. Here, there's one Chulin in 100 Gedulei Truma. You would think this Chulin is nullified l'chumra, that there isn't even chulin. So we learned in the Mishnah that one will be allowed to harvest all of the rows. Because every time you come to harvest, you have a doubt. And you can say, I'm harvesting the chulin. And you can do it on every single row that you harvest. The Mishnah makes it clear, this is only b'davar she'zarei kala. The davar she'ein zarei kala, we say the opposite. That even if you have 100 rows of chulin, and you plant only one row of gedulei truma, here again, normally, if it would not be mechuber, there would be bittul, right? 1 in 100. But since it's planted, and by that which is planted, there's no dinam of bittul. So therefore, you may not consume any of it. Now, both of these sides will be extensively analyzed in today's Amud Aleph. And I want to just share the following, that we learned many daf ago, Daf Nun Beis and Daf Nun Hey, and maybe even before, the din of replacement truma, and it's important to review it. Replacement truma means that when you had a mixture of truma and chulin, and you had the ratio of 100 to 1, midorais it's batal b'roif, midrabanan it's batal. Nevertheless, we learned before, because of Gezel HaShevet, the Chachamim said you can't just eat all of the 101, because at the end of the day, you know that one of these 101 used to be truma, even though it's halachically nullified. So what do you have to do? You have to be ma'aleh. You have to remove the one, separate one, and we learned that that one is rabbinically imbued with Kedushas Truma. And we're going to refer to that today as we used the word before, replacement Truma. The Gemara first will make various correlations between our Mishnah's Gedulei Truma din and the din of replacement Truma. As we will see, it's clear from Gemara. So to correct what I said yesterday, that the reason, coming back to this first topic of the second case, that when you have 100 rows of Gedulei Truma and you only have one row of Chulin, the reason why we are able to be so lenient is because it's a Drabanan. That's going to be the premise. And every time you harvest a row, you have a question whether there's a rabbinic problem or not. Safek Drabanan L'kula. Replacement Truma is also rabbinic Truma. And therefore, we're going to have similar. The Gemara here is going to apply similar cases to the replacement truma and apply the same halacha, all based on the rule of Safek Derabanan L'kula. We also have to clarify that in the case b'davar she'ein zarei kala, and Chaver, I know that we're really diving deep into Zeraim over here. You have to really halt up. Yakir has the advantage; she's already awake for a couple of hours. But I think for many people, just waking up is even the best. You have to really be sharp for today's stuff. B'davar she'ein zarei kala. So what did we learn? That even if you have 100 rows of chulin and you only have one row of truma, of gedulei truma, only one row of rabbinic gedulei truma, since it's b'davar she'ein zarei kala, which means that the original truma is there be'en, it's never going to be nullified. Now we're going to have a problem with that. Never nullified, guys. No one is eating it when it's connected. Once you harvested it, Aviv, don't you have the bittul of 1 in 100? If you have 100 rows of chulin and only one row of gedulei truma, once you harvested it, why would it not be nullified 1 in 100? And the answer is because ein mevatlin iser lechatchila, and therefore, since you went ahead and you harvested it and you mixed it up, it's never going to be null. It's a knas. We're going to have a problem with that because we did learn again in this Masechta way back when that there are exceptions to the rules of ein mevatlin iser lechatchila. One of the exceptions are when you're doing things that anyways would get done. we're going to go back to the case where you had grain of chulin, you have grain of truma. You did not have enough to be mevatalit, it's meduma, but the grain of chulin was high quality grain. So when you mill it, the flour becomes more voluminous. The truma grain was a very inferior type of grain. When you mill it, when you make it into flour, it actually diminishes. And after you ground it all up, now you do have the ratio of 100 to 1. And we learned above that lechatchila you can do it, and it's nullified. The answer is because grain is going to be milled anyways. You're not being mevatala iser, like you have a pot and some milk fell into the meat. So you want to add meat. You wouldn't have added meat if you wouldn't have had a problem. There is where we say, we're going to review all that, and we're going to see how this poses a problem to our Mishnah. Okay, Bekitzer, we also learned in our Mishnah that by Tevel, b'davar she'ein zarei kala, even gedulin are usher. Abraisa says the same thing regarding Truma, that by Truma, Truma, b'davar she'ein zarei kala, even gedulin remain Truma. Otherwise, we say, like we learned in the beginning of Halacha Beis, only Gedule Truma is Truma. Gedulin is Chulin. But we don't say that B'davar She'ein Zarikala. And yet the Gemara will give a limit to that. It doesn't mean that if you have Gedule, at some point, even B'davar She'ein Zarikala, it will be nullified, as we'll see in the Gemara. Halacha Gimel, this is a loaded daf. Halacha Gimel, the Mishnah that God willing we'll get through today, we'll discuss the following case. If a goy owns land in Israel, and we are going with the opinions that hold that his ownership does not remove the kedusha, that which grows has to be tithed, not by the owner, not by the goy, but it has to be tithed. What happens if you have a Jew that's working the land? Now, I want to say a word. A goy will always plant gedulei tevel because he's not separating it. He's a goyish farmer. Why would he be ma'aser? So we said gedulei tevel. The Mishnah said halacha gimel is chulin b'davar shezarei kala. B'davar she'ein zarei kala. The Mishnah said gedulei tevel is tevel. So let me ask you a question. If the goy came to the Gemar Malacha, I know he's a goy, he's not doing anything, and then you're working for him, and you took the grains that are not even allowed to be snacked of, and you planted it. Based on what we learned in the Mishnah, gedulei tevel by davar she'ein zarei kala is tevel. That means that when you harvest it, the Jew is a worker there. He harvests it. He should not even be allowed to snack from it even prior to the Gemar Malacha. The Mishnah says that's not the case. That's not going to be the case. That in the case where the goy owns the land, he will be allowed to snack from it, as we'll see in the Mishnah. And if we'll have enough time, we'll conclude the Mishnah. The next topic of the Mishnah will be what happens when you plant Truma Tameya. This is going to be an awesome mitzias of what do you mean by that? And we're gonna see how much we can unpackage today. Chavra Halkop. Right, everyone has to just remain with the clarity that almost everything we learned in the Mishnah differentiates almost everything, especially the ending of yesterday's daf, which was great, between davar she'ein zarei kala and b'davar she'zarei kala. And the second case of the Mishnah, daf peites amadalef, meya legina shel truma. The legina means rose. So the first case, every case was an extreme. First case was b'davar sheyes zarei kala. And you have over here 100 rows of gedulei truma, which is asur midrabanan to be eaten by a non-kohen. You even only have one row of chulin. Can you imagine? The din is that a non-kohen can eat all of the 101 rows. Because every time you harvest a row, you get to say, I have a suffix. There's 100 gedulei truma. Well, first of all, why isn't the chulin batal? Because it's mechuber lekarka. Something that's mechumer is not batal. Okay, so it's not batal. But still, it's 100 chances against one that Abanan we can be lenient. Amar Rabbi Yosi.
Sorry, Rabbi, why don't we say the last row should not be touched?
Same thing is with the chickens, because every time we harvest, even though we ate up the prior rows, they existed. We get to say that just because, Kaven, I already ate the gedulei truma, it doesn't mean that this one is not chulin.
Okay. Thank you, man.
Okay. Now, Amar Rabbi Yosi, like we said in the words of introduction, let's go back to what we learned above regarding replacement truma. Replacement truma was in the opposite case. Things are not mechuber. Things are talush. Midrabanan, you need to have a ratio of 1 in 100, which is what you had, 100 chulin, the opposite. 100 chulin, 1 truma. got mixed in. It's nullified. Yet the Chachamim says, Gazel HaShevet, you can't eat all the 101, right? You have to be ma'ala, that's the words. You have to lift up. You have to separate one from the 101. We're calling that replacement truma and give it to a kohen. The vart we learned above is that replacement truma is imbued with kedushas truma. Now, Amar Rav Yosi Zoisei Meres, I know there are very, very different ways of learning this Gemara. And there's no way we have enough time in today's daf. There's such a big daf today to learn everyone's opinion. But we're going to follow not dafke, not the Rashirilio. It's going to blow your mind if you have time later to learn it. We're going to learn the simple pshat that you have 100 saw of replacement truma. How do you get to 100 saw of replacement truma? You just understand what happened over here. That means you had 100 cases where you had 100 chulin and one truma that fell into it. And every time you did that, you removed one. You accumulated now 100 measures of replacement truma. In other words, that's the meaning of ha'oilois mitoich meya sa'a. And now you have one of chulin that fell into it. What do you have to do? What do you have to do now? Now, without our Mishnah, you would say, what do you mean? You had 100 replacement truma. Replacement truma you cannot eat. It's a rabbinic truma. You have one chulin that fell into it. First of all, it's not meduma because it's nullified, but you have to remove one and give it to a kohen, right? You have to remove the one chulin. Now, fakert. One chulin fell in. I would even say that the chulin is completely nullified, which would mean what? You have to give the 101 to a kohen. Fakert. Nullified. There's no gezel hashevet by non kahana. Says Rabbi Yosi, no. If even only one chulin fell in, you can now eat all of the 101 kavan, all of them. Because every time you take one out of this 101, you get to say, maybe the one that I just took is the one that was chulin. Just like our Mishnah told you, that even though you have 100 gedulei truma, only one row of chulin, the one row of chulin is going to allow you to eat all of them, because every time you eat one, you can claim this is chulin. It's a rabbinic. By rabbinic truma, you get to go on that side of leniency. So the same thing will be over there. Nischal fuloi, that if they got mixed up, meaning you don't know which one is the chulin, you don't know which ones are the 100 saw of replacement truma, mutarais, all of them are allowed to be eaten. And I know that Rashirilio says legamri a different shot, but we'll leave it at that. Yeah, correct. In other words, the chiddush is that in the Mishnah, since it's planted, like I asked the first question, why isn't the chulin nullified? I said because it's planted. Here you can't say that. Even though you don't have that, you still get to go leniently and say every time you want to eat, I took the one on chulin. Okay. And now, and the reason for that is because it's truma d'Rabbanan. That's the way we're going to learn the Gemara. Now we're going to go in the other direction. What was the other direction? That bedavar she'ein zarei kaleh. There, gedulei truma is not rabbinic truma. If you planted an onion that was truma, some of the truma onion is still there. So because of that, the Mishnah said the opposite, that if you had 100 rows of chulin, 100 rows of chulin, and even only one row of truma, so first of all, by the fact that it's one of truma in 100, it won't be nullified there because it's planted. So it's not nullified. But still, it's 100 of chulin. You may not eat any of them, said the Mishnah. Because every time you're coming to harvest a row, what do you have to be afraid of? That maybe you're harvesting the gedulei truma. Even though there's only one gedulei truma in 100 chulin, and therefore you can't have any of it. Okay. So says the Gemara, in the 5th chapter, on Dafne, Nun Beis, we learned that sa'a truma she'alas mitoich meya. Let's go back to the replacement saw. What happens if you have one replacement saw? One, and it fell into chulin. So Rabbi Yochanan said these words: "Chulin kol shehein mevatlin oisa." Since it's only rabbinic truma, normally you would say at least you need to have bittul midin toira, which means you should have 2 against 1. That's what normally you would think to say. At least it should be not. No. Rabbi Yechanan says that even any amount of chulin that got mixed into a huge amount of replacement truma, you can eat all of it. So therefore, v'hachi over here,
I'm sorry, I don't understand the.
I'm sorry. I'm not going to the case b'davar she'ein zarikola. I got ahead of myself. B'davar she'zarikola. Rabbi Yossi said that if you have 100 of replacement truma, yakir, and 1 chulin fell into it, you can have all of it. But you have to have 1 sa. The Gemara is going to show you that Rabbi Yechanan is going to be even more lenient. Because now that we made this comparison above by the replacement truma, Rabbi Yechanan spoke about such a case. But he didn't speak about you have 100 replacement and 1 chulin. He said that you have 1 replacement and you have a drop of chulin. Chulin kol shein. Rabbi Yechanan holds that you don't even need to have roiv. Since it's only rabbinic truma, the moment there's any mixture of chulin, all of it is permitted. V'hachi over here, likate, the nafal l'toichen chulin kol shehein, they are mutarim. In other words, Rabbi Yechanan is even more lenient than Rabbi Yossi. Let's go to the case of the Mishnah, that if you had over here what we said, you had 100 rows of this gedulei truma. So forget about the case of the Mishnah, Rabbi Mendel. Stam, you have gedulei truma. You harvested gedulei truma. What happens if a mashu of chulin falls into it? Not 1 whole row. It's also going to be batel. In other words, we're just taking it further. We're saying that these levels of rabbinic truma are so weak that they only make that gezeda if it's pure. The moment there's any amount of chulin, they never made the gezeda. Okay. And now we're going to the other case in the Mishnah, b'davar she'ein zarikala, like we mentioned. And what's the b'davar she'ein zarikala? That if you have 100 rows of chulin, chavra, and you only have 1 row of gedulei truma, b'davar she'ein zarikala. So our Mishnah is saying none of it can be eaten. Now you have to understand something. No one is eating anything when it's mechubar. See, that's the problem. The problem is, Aviv, you have 100 rows of chulin. Why don't we say that the 1 row of truma, taka truma, because davar she'ein zari, why isn't it nullified? Because it's mechubar. I get it. I'm not eating it when it's mechubar. I'm going to harvest it and then eat it. Why would I not be allowed to harvest all of it? Now that I harvest all of it, now I have 100 of chulin against 1 of truma. That should be the normal din where the truma is nullified. And then you have to give a replacement. I get it, but the rest you can eat. Why wouldn't we say so? So first of all, really, it's subject to a machloikes tanoim. But the chachamim in a braisa, and this is the premise of our Gemara, are of the opinion that even if you were to harvest this 101 rows, you're still not allowed to eat it. Why are you not allowed to eat it? Because since there's a rule of ein mevatlin isa lechatchila, while it was connected, our Mishnah says it's not batal. The 1 row of gedulei truma b'davar she'ein zarei kala ruins everything. So once it's already ruined, how are you nullifying it? By taking it from a chuber and you're uprooting it. You're not allowed to do that. You're being mevatel it. And whenever you are mevatel iser, they consent you, they penalize you that you should not benefit from it. We got a problem with that. Why do we have a problem from it? Because Kamo, the Gemara is asking, frek the Gemara on Daf Nun Daled, before, Kamo de Rabbi Yechanan Amar Taman, just like Rabbi Yechanan said above in the 5th chapter. And the case that we spoke about, Aviv, was where you had a mixture of grains, and you did not have 100 against 1. Let's say you had 99 of chulin and 1 of truma, meduma. A non-kohen cannot eat it. But if the grains of chulin were from a higher quality, and higher quality grain, when you mill it, when you turn it into flour, there's much less psoilus, so you end up with a larger amount of flour. The one measure of truma was from grains that are of a inferior type of grain. So now that you milled it, now it got diminished. After you milled it all together, now you do have the ratio of 100 chulin against 1 of truma. So Rabbi Yechanan explained above that you are allowed to eat it. Nevertheless, he said toichenu matir. And the logic behind it that you are lechatchila allowed to mill it, and now you're going to have the bittul, is because you did something which is the norm to do. People don't eat grain. Some people used to eat toasted grains. We know that. But the normal, the halach yelech of grain is you turn it into flour. And that was a big cloud that we learned many times in this Masechta already. That Ein Mevatel Isa Lechatchila is not a hard and fast rule. That there are exceptions. One of the big exceptions is if what you are going to do is something that you would have done regardless, then you can go ahead and do it. Same thing over here. When you have planted rows, no one leaves rows planted in the ground. Everyone is going to harvest it. So we should say the same logic. So that's a Gavaldika question. So Af Hachi Kain, it's going to be harvested regardless. And you have 100 rows of chulin and only one row of geduli truma, bedavar she'ein zari kala. Why would it not be nullified? Why does the Mishnah say you can never eat it? The answer is extremely important. Let me say it by heart. That in the case of the grain, the first thing that happened was that there was a mixture of the truma and the chulin. And in the case above, where you did not have 100 to 1, it's already mixed. When you go ahead and grind it, you're not mixing it by grinding it. You're being moisif. You're now somehow fluffing up, making more the chulin and less the truma. But you're not creating a mixture. You're changing the proportions, which will halachically be mevatalit. You did not mix it. When the rows are growing in the ground, every row is completely separate. So when you're going to go ahead and you're going to harvest it together, you're doing an act of mixing. That is something you're not allowed to do. Let's read it inside. Come on over there. The Gemara is going to say that right now. That's a big, we change everything through that. Come on over there. When you are milling it, it's already mizeh umizeh ala biyadoi. Now, I don't know exactly how much from each. Let's say it's mixed proportionally or not proportionally, but you're beginning already with a taroivis. This is great. But over here, when you have rows, you are harvesting a row. Maybe the row that you harvested, I know there was 100 of chulin, I know that. But maybe the row that you harvested, all of it is truma. It's not that there is a mixture and you're changing the proportions. Even though the Gemara says the word tevel, I know the topic here is about truma. That's the case in the Mishnah. It will be the same by tevel, by the way. By tevel, b'davar she'ein zari kol, it's also not nullified. But here, kol ha-tevel ola b'yodei, maybe the one that you harvested was legamri, the one of truma. And therefore, the Mishnah can say that you can't eat any of them. However, oy bazoi, Rabdani, that's what the Gemara is going to say now. That if that's the case, when indeed does the Mishnah say that now that you have even only one gedulei truma and 100 chulin, a non-kohen cannot eat any of them? That's only if they were harvested one at a time. B'sheliket mei achas. In other words, every time you harvest a row, then you're asking a shaila: is this row good or not good? You have to say this row is not good. But avalim liket mishteyem. What happens if you harvested even only 2 rows or more? Imagine if you only harvested 2 rows. Now, guys, we're talking about someone who harvested 2 rows prior to them knowing that there's a problem here. And now that they harvested 2 rows, there's still 99 rows left. Now they were notified, one second, one of them was gedulei truma, but it's already mixed. Now that it's already mixed, since all of the rows are going to be harvested anyway, the din will be you are allowed to continue to harvest the whole 99 rows and mix them up together and now say I can have all of it. And it's not called ein mevatel isa lechatchila because what you did was something that you would do anyways. Masha'enkein, if you harvested one or none, then the halacha is when people harvest. By the way, I know you have 2 hands, but you don't use one hand for this row and that row. You harvest rows at a time. So harvest, and every time you harvest a row, every time you have to be machmer by saying, first of all, it's not nullified, it's mechuber when it's connected. It's a doiraisa. So I'm viewing it as a 50-50 suffix doiraisa luchum. And every time you harvested a row, we paskin on that which you harvested. This is going to be the one of truma. This is going to be the one of truma. and you mixing them up, and that's where the Mishnah says you may not eat any of them. So it's your awareness of the problem that will be very consequential. Again, if you become aware of it, that's the way we're learning. If you become aware of it after you harvested 2 rows, since it could be that the 2 rows are already mizeh ala b'yadeh, then you can add to the mixture, and everything will become mutter.
Let's say he was aware and he still went ahead and harvested 2 rows. That's it. So he was
Then we penalize him.
Oh, but the penalty would apply just to what he did, right?
Yeah, but every time you're going to harvest further, again, there's a suffix. Doesn't help.
Now it's already part of an existing.
No, we don't know that for sure. In other words, you have to be machman on both sides. We're going to paskin that the 2 is usher because maybe the truma's in there, but maybe the truma's still on the ground. Every time you do something, you have to be machman. Okay. Turning to daf pei tes amud beis. It's amazing the seder of the Mishnah. So the Mishnah began by telling you geduli truma is only by truma and not by tevel. Then the Mishnah gave the case of these rows. Then the Mishnah went back to the tevel part, and the Mishnah said that when do I say that gedulei tevel, the first gedulei tevel, is already chulin? Bedavar shezarei kala, bedavar she'ein zarei kala. Not only is gedulei tevel, even gedulin of tevel is going to be aser. And like we explained in the Mishnah, first of all, by tevel, the issue is what? Can you snack? Just to know what the issue is. Don't forget, it's tevel. Tevel has to be tied regardless. Eloma, prior to Gemar Malacha, you can snack. After the Gemar Malacha, you cannot snack. The Mishnah is speaking about someone that planted tevel after the Gemar Malacha. If you say geduli tevel, that means that now the new growth never be snacked. If you say that, like in the ratio of the Mishnah, by davar shezari kala geduli tevel chulin, then you can only snack from it. Okay, but if davar she'ein zari kala, like by the onion, since the onion was already nigmar malachtoi, that some of that onion is in the ground, so the status that you can't even snack stays because it's be'en. Now, what happens if you take that second growth and you plant it again? What happens if you take the third plant and you plant it again? The Gemara is going to point out that there will be a time in which we say that even though it's bedavar she'ein zarei kala, now there's nothing left from the original. And the Gemara will be machalek between tevel and truma. Because even though our Mishnah never spoke about gedulin of truma, our Mishnah said that gedulei truma is problematic. Gedulin is okay. But a Braisa tells you that's only bedavar shezarei kala. Bedavar she'ein zarei kala, even gedulin by truma is problematic. The same thing, there is a point, but the point of truma will be more chamor than the point of tevel. Let's read it inside. Gedulin asurin. Frek the Gemara at heichen. The premise is this cannot be forever. So Rabbi Yaakov bar Idi b'shem Rabbi Yechanan, and I know the girsois are so consequential, but we're going to follow the girsa that was accepted. Ad shalosh geronois asurais for haraviis muteres. Once it's the 4th, it's going to be muter. When I learned this, what came to my mind was in Parshas Lech Lecha, v'doi revi'i yoshuva heina. And I have a good story about this. I know I'm being medama ingen lagamri completely, but it's a gavaldik word, I think, if I may say so. With the Rebbe, the Rebbe was really the 5th generation from Baruch Shalom. But we're going to get to that by the Truma. Okay. So now that the Gemara b'Shem Rabbi Yechanan established, Otazoi, very good. We have these things at some point. Now that we established that by Tevel, even though the Mishnah says that gedulin are asurim, that's what we have in the Mishnah. So the Amayra Rabbi Yechanan is saying, yeah, but there is a shear to it. Once it's the 4th time over, the original is nullified. You know what, we have this 3 generations also by for the Vishnanta Levanecha goes to children and grandchildren, the obligation, right? I forgot there is a chazal. When people look down, who's the eldest of our group now? Probably Vlad. That's a compliment, Vlad. You're a young man, I know, I'm just trying. So there's a point where when you look at your great-great-grandkids, I think there is a point where you don't identify with them anymore. Danny's saying Tilam Shabbos was only 3 generations. At some point, you're not there. It's connected to this. But one second. Now, like we mentioned, we had a Braisa that we learned that by Truma, Bidavar, She'ein Zarei Kale, even Gedulin is truma here also. Cannot be forever. Rab Shmuel bar Avudma asked in front of Rav Mana, Mistama, after he heard B'Shem Rabbi Yechanan. What do we say the same by truma? Betruma at kama. It's amazing how Rav Mana knew this. So Amalei, different ways of learning. We're going to learn that also goyden haravias ke goyden harashayna. Now that we just said that by tevel the goyden revias is already good, not by truma. By truma, even the fourth, Danny, that's the pshat, the way we're learning, is like the first, which is a problem. But that's the end of the line. Ma goyden harashayna davar shezarei kala betruma. Even b'davar shezarei kala, the first time is asur ubetevel muter. In other words, why are we saying that? Why are we being more machmer? Because we already know that truma is more chamer than tevel. B'davar shezarei kala, tevel, even the first time around is muter. But by truma, even b'davar shezarei kala, gedulei truma is truma. It's gavaldik. So therefore, even b'davar she'ein zarei kala, we're going to make truma more chamer than tevel. Af goyden haravias b'davar she'ein zarei kala, betruma will be aser, and that is ubetevel muter. But you have to understand what Rav Mana is implying. In other words, we want to make sure that truma is always one step more chamer than tevel. I got that, but it's only one step more chamer. So it's only goyden haravias that is a problem by truma. But the goyden chamishis, that's what he's implying, is going to be muter. And just to say the story that when the Tzemach Tzedek was passing away, so he told his sons that each one should become a rebbe on their own right. But to his bechar, to Rav Baruch Shalom, which is the Rebbe's grandfather's grandfather, he told him that you should stay here in Lubavitch, even though the Rebbe in Lubavitch was the Rebbe Marash. And then he told him, Doi Revi Yoshuv Ahena. The Doi Revi from Rav Baruch Shalom was the Rebbe's father. And there's a story, whether accurate or not, that at some point the Rebbe's father said that even though the Zayda, the Tzemach Tzedek, said Doi Revi Yoshuv Ahena, which would have meant that he should have been the Rebbe, but it looks like it's going for one more generation. Was when that's Rab Leivik on understanding that his son, that the Rebbe is becoming the Rebbe. Way back when. So here you see this 4 or 5. Maybe Truma. However you want to learn this. And if you have something else to say, you can shout at the camera and I'm fine with that. Okay. Now another inyan. It's amazing how they were makatzer. The Mishnah asked, what's davar shezarei kala? Vasidas. That's what Shlomo asked yesterday. And the Mishnah says, kegoin, the onions, the loof, right? The loof and the onions and the garlic. Guys, the word kegoin implies that these are only examples. Kegoin means there are other things. That's the Gemara's question. That's the my islach. Go figure. My islach, why, if they would be the only 3 items, Rabbeinu HaKadosh wouldn't have written the word kegoin. Muzman Zagin, that there was something else that is also davar she'ein zarei kala. Amar Rabbi Yossi berabun. Kegoin. Now, either the gears is hakelufsin, legume that we don't know what, I don't know what it means. The bigger chachamim also don't know what it means, but there's another girsa that it's not kelufsin, but it's kulkisin. And kulkisin, where's kevan? Kulkisin is kolkas. And then the Gabe is going to first correct my pronunciation, or the Yerdenish. And kolkas, das weiß man schon ja. Kolkas is English, or sholkas. But the Kitzer, there is another one that they found, and that's why Rebbe said kegoin. And I don't think the Gemara means to say it's the only one. It just means there are other ones. When I learned yesterday, when we learned the Mishnah, and I said there's a machlokes rishonim in the understanding of Rabbi Yehuda, I didn't say wrong, because in the Mishnah is different rishonim say different, but it's really a machlokes amoraim. The machlokes rishonim is each one siding with another amoira from Yerushalmi. In other words, it's very strange. The Mishnah gave 3 examples. One of them was shum. Then Rabbi Yehuda Oimer, no. Hashum is kisa'oidim. And there's 2 opposite ways of what he meant. We spoke them both out. The Rash, Rabbeinu Shimshon, says the first one. So Rababo, B'Shem, Rabbi Yossi, in other words, they were just quoting, each Rishon was quoting another Amoida. So the first one, B'Shem Rabbi Yossi Bar Chanina, is, he says it depends. You can't make a statement that garlic is davar she'ein zarei kala. That Hashum, ad kisa'oidim, is like ledavar shezarei kala. That's what you said yesterday. That if the shum that you planted was very little, ad kisa'oidim means if it didn't even have the size of a barley when you planted it, then whatever you planted will completely decompose. When do we say that garlic retains some of its original ein zarei kola, that's kisa oidim. It's a whole different word. So really, maybe they're not even arguing. Rabbi Yehuda is just qualifying that if someone were to plant a garlic when it's super, super small, then it will be davar shezarei kola. But he agrees. Once it has the size of a, I'm saying, but we know garlic. At least a few things that we know. Garlic is like, I don't know, like 50 barleys. I'm saying a garlic is a garlic. Even one little shtickle is many, many times the sa'odim.
I don't understand. We don't plant garlic. We plant seeds.
First of all, I never knew that.
Does it have a different
So I'm
size
happy
of
that you're
seeds?
telling me that. You plant the garlic itself. Are you sure? I never saw the seed in the garlic. Can someone Google this?
Kevan.
Kevin is at work. Kevin is multitasking. So go find out about that. I thought that the onion itself is planted and the garlic itself is planted. The bulb is planted. Okay, thank you. And mikan ve'elach, that's what the Tan is saying. Only at kisa'oiden, it is kola. Mikan ve'elach l'davar she'ein zarei kola. That's one way of learning it. The other way of learning it, which is much harder, is that there is a machlokes tanoim whether garlic is davar shezarei kola or not. Rabbi Yossi ben Abum b'shem Rabbi Yossi ben Rab Chanina. It's amazing how both of them are quoting the same Rabbi Yossi ben Rab Chanina. So it's a machlokes hamaroim b'shem the same amoida. No, so item for some reason is being used as the example of davar shezarei kola. So item hashum is kisoidim. Now, always, like we said, there can never be a machlokes and mitzias. It doesn't work that way. It means the kula alma, when you plant a garlic, unlike the onion, by the garlic.
It's actually come in a form of cloves, and it has different sizes, so it fits right in.
Very good.
Exactly. It's not a seed. You plant the whole clove.
But the Akir was mentioning something else, that you plant a whole clove, you plant a little pieces. He's saying in every bulb, there are different sizes. There are different sizes.
Right.
One can be big, one can be small.
There are different sizes of cloves, but you plant the cloves.
You plant the cloves. But let me go back over here. What must be pshat is that when you plant a garlic, some of it decomposes. Some of it remains. And there's a machlokes in halacha, how are we to view it? Do we view that which remains as taka it remained, or not? Or since most of it decomposed, we don't give chashivus to that which remained. It must be a halachic question and not a metzias question. Or the different types of garlics. Chal garlics, I know in the Chassidish yeshivas, when do we have garlic matzah Shabbos? It's shreklach. In yeshiva, not balabatim. I never saw balabatim do it, but don't ask. Okay.
I never heard that one.
You never heard that? Oh, Shlomo, yeah, you're familiar with that. They give out in the shuls. Give out garlic. Chveisk. All right. They give out garlic by a pidyon aben. Why do we put garlic on the pidyon aben? To ward away the bad. To ward away, because when you eat garlic, you're going to ward away everyone. That's the pshat. All right. Now let's go back. Let's go back to gedulei tevel. Gedulei tevel. That's what we're talking about. The Mishnah said that gedulei tevel, aviv, gedulei tevel bedavar she'ein zarei kola. What's the status of that? Tevel. Tevel, which means that when it grows out of the ground, I'm not even allowed to snack from the tevel, even before the gemar melacha. You get that? Why? Because you planted it from tevel that was already gemar melachet. This Mishnah is speaking about the case where a goy was the landowner. We're mentioning a goy simply to give you a case where it's a given that the tevel, that which was planted was tevel. A goy is not obligated to separate Trumas and Maasros, and our Mishnah is following the many Tanoim that hold, but the cheftza of the product that grew in the Holy Land has to be tithed no matter who the owner is. All right? That ein kinyan la'akum. Ein kinyan la'akum la'havkiya. That's what we're following. So here, and again, a goy is not mechuyev in the mitzvahs. A Jew is a aris, or a Jew is a worker. And the question is, we're going to be lean, not question. The Mishnah will just say a statement that here we will be leaning in. Hamenakesh im hanachri b'chasiyois. So there's many milsa agav urcha komashmalan. First of all, the word chasiyois is a generic word for many types of products. Most of them are davar she'ein zarei kola. So included in this word chasiois, which is a type of plant, included in that is the loof, is the onion, is the garlic. Menakesh, another thing. Chasiois, including the onion and the garlic and the loof, maybe others, they are very sensitive. Mistama connected to the fact that ein zarei kala, and it's extremely important when you plant these items to weed the weeds, to take out the weeds. Weeds is, for those who don't know, that when you plant a field, sometimes, even though you plowed over, some seed of some other product could have remained in the ground, and it's not what you want to grow, and everything that grows is yoinik, takes nourishment, and it's like a levatola. And for you to have a better produce, you want to get rid of the weeds. So that was just example the Mishnah is giving. It's all just examples. So if you have a Jew, he's working in a field of chasiyos, and he's weeding with the goy. The din is, even though from the Jew's perspective, the goy planted it, or he planted it with the seeds of the goy, the presumption is that when did the goy use items to plant? After the Gemar Malacha, you finish the last year's harvest, you designate whatever you'll eat for eating, whatever you're selling for selling, and whatever you're going to use for replanting, that was already done. Now you're planting. We learned, B'davar she'ein zarei kala, which is chasiyos, the din should have been, that gedulei tevel tevel, which would mean that when the Jew is working with the goy, he would not be allowed to eat achila sarei. Says the Mishnah, it's not the case. Afal pishet peiros of tevel, yes, oichel mehem arai. Farvos, the Gemara will give us. Let's leave it for the Gemara. Next case, I'm happy we have time. I'm happy we started a few minutes early. So let's go. Now, I want to speak about shesilim. The word ashasel, right? We have this in scripture. We say this in Tehillim. We're speaking about young nursery plants, common things that you uproot here and you replant over there. One of the items that the Mishnah is going to be referring to, just as an example, I'm not talking about an apple tree, okay? We're speaking about a type of plant that, let's say cabbage. You plucked cabbages while they were small. Cabbages that are called shesilim are also edible. You have to understand this oilam. It means when you have a field, let's go cabbage, you are harvesting cabbage, you have an option. You can either replant. Normally, if you're planning to eat it, you wouldn't have plucked it out of the ground early. That's not the way it works. Normally, you let it become bigger and bigger. So let's just example is, a person decided, I have a neighboring field, I need to have cabbage over there. So you uprooted, you harvested a certain amount of small cabbages that you are calling shesile to be replanted. Now understand something, that let's speak about Tuma and Tara. For Oichel to acquire Tuma, first of all, we know it first has to become Mukhshir, we know that, but it also has to be in the category of Oichel. Shesilim, like in the example that I gave, cabbage, even though your intention was to replant it, since it is edible as it is right now, it's halachically considered oichel, and it's subject, with all of the conditions, to be mekabel tuma. What happened here was like this. You uprooted these small cabbages, you changed your mind, and you said, you know what? I'm going to eat it. I'm going to eat it. I'm a Truma Yid. I separated Truma Sumaisis. I happen now to have some of these little guys designated as Truma, and one of them became Tamei. And now you said, you know what? I'm replanting it. I'm just giving you a case of the Mishnah. Yeah. In other words, it doesn't have to be this example, but you have to figure out how to make this a reality. The Mishnah is addressing what would be the status of Truma itself that became Tamei that was replanted. That's the issue. Okay? What's the issue? Do we say that since you replanted it, it completely lost its Tuma? Don't forget, something that's mechuber lekarka cannot become Tamei. You know, in Hilchos Kalim that we learned, there's no end in the Rambam. Hilchos Kalim, I don't know how many parakim we had over there. So, you know, you have a keli, it's Tamei. Sometimes you say that the status changed. You know, it broke. It's no longer usable. It's different. And the Tuma goes away. You melted it. It's nullified. Shivir doesn't zeu takanasan. So same idea might have been said over here, that the very act of replanting it will remove its tuma. Says the Mishnah, that's not exactly the case. But the fact that you replanted it does make a change in status. And that is the following. Oichel that is tamei, yeah, we know it has to have the size of a kibetza to convey tuma. Okay, this cabbage has the size of a kibetza. Replanting it like a tefillah oisa mechza, it remains tamei, but it loses its ability to convey tuma. That's the din of the Mishnah. Let's read it inside. Shislei or shesilei, you have to know how to read it. Truma. Shenitma'u. And the Mishnah is speaking about now you replanted it. That's the meaning of shesalon. If you replant it, taharu. Remember this klal. Whenever there is a chidik in the word tuma, it means to become. It's like me. Chidik is me. Whenever there's a shva, whenever there is meh to convey. Two shva is two dots. One dot is me, two dots is me and you. It's metashva. So it does accomplish that as far as it being able to convey tuma, for that we say no, it's starred. That's the meaning of shasalom taharum elatame. Aber daf tzadik, but but since it did not lose its tuma vis-a-vis, truma tamei is not allowed to be eaten, so you cannot eat it. But 1 second, it's not going to impart tuma. Now, when you replant a cabbage, it keeps on growing. It's one of these items, she'ein zarikala. So now you have this huge cabbage. The new parts are not tamei, even if they got wet, because the original can no longer be metamai. I got that. But you're not allowed to eat the original. So what do you have to do? You have to be yogoim it. Yoga means you have to cut it out. Or maybe I'm learning wrong. Maybe the pshat is that when you replant it, since you're not allowed to eat it, prior to replanting it, trim it, prune it. Now, if you're going to prune all of it, there'll be nothing to replant. But you have to know how these things work. If you take away all of the edible leaves, and all you leave is the inedible core, all you leave is the inedible roots, it can still produce. I think that's what the Mishnah is saying. So, for you to be able to eat, you can't just unplant it, even though the new won't be tummy, but the original is tummy. So you have to yogam it, you have to cut it off. You have to trim it all the way down to parts that are not edible. They're not edible. Mm-hmm. Parts that you trimmed off, even though they cannot be metame fuel only. Cut it down. Rabbi Huda says it's not enough to cut it down once. Wow. So that would mean, yeah, you cut it down, you plant it, it begins to regrow, pull it out of the ground, cut it down again. And then, when you plant it again, then you're good to go. It's like Achsidische Verbringen. Someone cuts you down to your bone. So you think you're good. So in the second sikha, they got to cut you down the second time.